Good evening and welcome to tonight's wellness program. My name is Claire Varesio. I'm the community librarian at Cupertino Library. I'm excited to have you join us for training for COVID, optimizing fitness and resilience for COVID-19 with Dr. Ronesh Sinha. Tonight's program is supported by Cupertino Library Foundation, and I would like to welcome Board President Henry Sang to say a few words about Cupertino Library Foundation.
Oh, good evening. Well, I guess my background thing went away on me. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Tonight's video, our lecture is, I believe, the last in our 2020 series for the wellness program. And if there's ever a time when we need to talk wellness, I think today's world is one where we need all the pointers and everything we can get. I wanted to thank the library because it's difficult to put on these types of programs during these types of special circumstances. I don't know if many of the people in the audience know, but many of the library staff are actually working as emergency disaster service employees for the county. And they've been doing this for the duration. It ebbs and flows. And I want you to make sure that when you go to our library, you thank people, or if you could just reach out and thank them, because there's so much that our employees are doing to help. Once again, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy tonight's show.
Great. Thank you, Henry. For more information about Cupertino Library Foundation, you can go to their website, cupertinolibraryfoundation.org. And I will be introducing our speaker this evening. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Ronesh Sinha, or Dr. Ron. Dr. Ron is a two-time TEDx speaker and author of the South Asian Health Solution. He's an internal medicine physician at the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, who runs corporate health education and wellness programs for major Silicon Valley companies. And you can learn more at his website, culturalhealthsolutions.com. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ron.
Great. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And Claire, I was just going to let you know that there are some admission pop-ups that are coming up. I'm assuming you're getting those too, right? So you're able to let them in.
I am. So I'm keeping an eye as we have more folks join us. I'm letting them in.
Perfect. Great. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started here. So it's a pleasure to be here. And one thing I wanted to let you know is as I go through the information in this talk, I'll give this resource to you at the end too, but a lot of people have very detailed questions about some of what we're covering, including practical lifestyle strategies. I have that all in this COVID resource book, which is a free ebook that people all over the world are using. So at the end, I'll share this resource, but if you go to this link, you put your email address in there, you'll get the COVID survival guide, which has really been a resource that a lot of people benefited from. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the content of the show here. Okay, so first thing is I wanted to start off by letting you understand my approach to this whole issue. One of the things about COVID-19 or any stressful situations we face is I tell individuals that depending on which part of the brain we're using when we're processing this information, it can have an impact on our stress response. So typically when I'm teaching people about COVID-19 principles, I tell them that I want to teach them the operating system of COVID-19. Because if you look at it as being more of a logical problem that we need to solve through lifestyle, you engage the frontal cortex, the Einstein part of the brain, and that will help tame our immune system. So this is the frontal cortex or the neocortex at the top. The mid part of the brain is the limbic system or the emotional part of the brain. And when that's overactive, that can overactivate our immune system. So as you understand this problem, and we'll go through this in detail, you'll see that we'll find some lifestyle strategies that are practical, logical, evidence-based. And I've now been doing this for several months with patients. And I've seen that some of the strategies that I talk about today, when patients have implemented them, they've literally sailed through COVID-19. It was nothing more than just a mild cold or a very limited flu. But those that did not stick to a lot of these principles, they had a much more marked course. So I really hope I can take these practical concepts based around experience that I've developed in the clinic and really help you minimize risk going forward. So what is the operating system of COVID-19? Well, let's take a look at this diagram right here. So this blue ball right here, circle, is, let's say, your lung cell. We've got COVID-19 on the left, which is an RNA virus. The way it enters your cell is by this doorway called the ACE2 receptor. So it enters through that doorway. It basically hijacks our own genetic material. I call that our 3D printer. And then it starts to make copies of itself. So you can see the virus replicating in this diagram. So that is what I talk about as being the viral load, which is on the left part of the cell. Now, how does our body respond to this? How do we thwart this viral replication or this viral attack? Well, we turn on our internal alarm system. There's a specific molecule we call NLRP3. It's known as the inflammasome. And all it literally means is we're recruiting chemicals and molecules from our immune system that come into the cell to thwart that attack and reduce the viral load. And one of the key chemicals that comes into our cell are these little proteins called cytokines. So we want to bring in enough cytokines to help suppress this infection. But when you're reading about these scary side effects in the news, lung damage, heart damage, autoimmunity, etc., what's happening is our response is so overactive. There's a process called pyroptosis. So pyro meaning fire. Optosis literally means that the cell is exploding or rupturing as a result of this overzealous attack of the immune system onto our cell. So really our goal here through lifestyle is to actually modulate our immune system so it gives a very precise strike to these viruses without doing friendly fire damage to our own body. That's literally what we're trying to do here. Okay, so first of all, let's look at this in a table form. So on the left side of that image, I talked about the viral load. And this is something that we've been basically focused on through the news for a long time. How do we limit our exposure to the virus? So physical distancing, minimum of 6 feet, hand hygiene, washing any potential virus off our hands, covering coughs and sneezes, using the masks per guidelines. Fomites are the viruses that might be on surfaces. So that's the viral load. And hopefully by now, most of us have a routine that basically minimizes that viral load. But now I want us to shift our attention to how do we minimize that cytokine load? This is really what determines whether you survive and thrive or end up with a more severe manifestation of COVID-19. So I put the different categories here, like activity and exercise, stress, mental health, sleep, nutrition, underlying conditions. These are all things that can cause an exaggerated response of that cytokine load. And today specifically, we're going to focus on the role of activity and exercise. So the fitness fundamentals around COVID-19 that I'm going to focus on today are what I call the ABCs. So activity, breathing, and cardio. So let's jump right in. So what do I mean by activity? So whenever I see patients in the clinic, these are the 3 areas I look at. Many of them tell me that they're getting 30 minutes of cardio, they're doing a boot camp, but then they're sitting all day. So the act of prolonged sitting can actually generate more cytokines in our body. It can contribute to the cytokine fire. And this has been known before COVID-19. We found that when people sit on average for more than 30 to 45 minutes, in some studies more than 60 minutes, their body generates more of those cytokines. And that actually has been linked to all types of chronic health conditions like diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. So it's something we have to really keep in mind. And I wanted to point out a few of these studies that highlight this. So let's look at this first study at the top here. What happens when we actually interrupt the act of prolonged sitting? And I encourage all of you who are watching this talk, if you're able to stand up, go ahead and do that right now, especially if you've spent a large part of your day sitting in front of a computer. So this first study basically showed that 4 hours of sitting disrupted by a 3-minute bout of intense exercise lowered leg swelling, meaning it improved circulation, and it lowered the levels of a cytokine called IL or interleukin 8. And this did this among healthy, active, and young adults. So that's really pretty significant response there. The next study basically showed that in female diabetics, for every hour they reduced their sedentary time, their C-reactive protein level dropped by 24%. CRP is a blood marker for inflammation. So many of my patients that are sedentary, they've got diabetes, they're carrying extra fat around their belly, often their CRP levels can be higher. But as they get moving and they're getting more physically active, they're interrupting prolonged sitting, we can see that inflammatory marker go down. So individuals that have elevated inflammation at baseline, if they get a COVID-19 infection, like I said, their risk of a more severe response might be greater. So that's really what we're doing when we're interrupting prolonged sitting. Okay, so that's why I want to show you in this diagram, when we interrupt prolonged sitting, what happens is with prolonged sitting, we're elevating body fat, we're increasing glucose, we're elevating blood pressure too. And I put the first 3 in red because those are 3 risk conditions that actually make COVID-19 worse. So we want to make sure we can minimize that as much as possible. So I hope at the very least at the end of this presentation, as you think about the way you work or about the way that your kids study, we can basically get people to move and interrupt that act of prolonged sitting. So your goal, how do we do this? Here are some other ways you can do that. I tell people, I want people to implement a practice called exercise snacking, where you snack on movement, not on salt and sugar throughout the day. And this will actually shift your metabolism and your internal resources to help keep you in motion. It's going to burn more fuel. It's going to keep you more energetic. It's going to lower your blood sugar, your blood pressure, and really lower your overall risks. So this could be a movement of at least 2 to 3 minutes every 30 to 45 minutes roughly. So with exercise snacking, to get more tactical, I tell individuals you want to stock, visit, and snack on movement. So what do I mean by that? When I say stock your pantry, you want to come up with a variety of movements and exercises throughout your workday. And you can see some of these that I've outlined here. And we're going to go into more details around the different types of exercises that I do throughout my workday. You want to make sure you visit that pantry like we talked about at least every 45 to 60 minutes for a few minutes. And then you want to snack on that activity for at least 5 minutes. So that resource guide that I talked about at the very end, it has pictures and photos of the different types of exercises and postures and movements that I do throughout my workday. And we're going to go through some of these today as well. Now, B is for breathing, okay? So engaging your diaphragm when you breathe. So basically, one of the ways that we can actually modulate our stress response is by slower breathing, predominantly through the nose. So you can see in this animation that as we're breathing through the nose, this woman's belly is going in and out, right? That's diaphragmatic breathing, when you're breathing deeper into the stomach and your chest is remaining relatively still. So this activates our relaxation system. It helps oxygenate the lungs, the brain, the muscles, and really helps lower overall stress levels. So something really important to try. So there are a couple of different breathing exercises I've talked about that have really helped people manage their stress. One of the simple techniques is a simple practice called nasal breathing. So literally when you're at rest, when you're exercising, just breathing with your mouth closed and breathing through your nose can actually help improve oxygen delivery to all your vital organs, and it can help lower blood pressure and help you feel calmer. There's a lot of science that's been around the art of nasal breathing. I wrote a blog post on this that I put at the bit.ly link there. And then when sometimes you feel like you can't get the breath deeper, there's more vigorous breathing practices that you can do. And I put a list of these here: bellows breath, breath of fire, alternate nostril breathing, 4-7-8 breathing. These are all from the ancient science of pranayama, which is an Indian breathing science. And really, I have patients that are elite athletes, and before they compete, often they'll do these sorts of practices to really relax their nervous system and get that oxygen circulating much better. So really try these things out. Now, if you need more tactical things to help you with the breathing, I've put a couple of high-tech tools here that I've used with patients. I've used personally as well. The Universal Breathing app by a company called Sagara is a great tool. I use this to get my kids to sort of do breathing from an early age. The Breathe app on your Apple Watch, or if you're using a Fitbit, that can be a great way to improve breathing as well too. And the thing I like about the wearables is you can look at your baseline heart rate now, maybe while you're stressed out. You can do your breathing, and then you can magically see your heart rate drop by 3, 4, maybe 5 beats per minute. And that's significant. That's a sign that you're calming down that, that revved up cardiovascular system. So I put a bunch of resources here too for the breathing. The other thing I want you to be aware of with breathing is, I didn't put a slide in here, but basically a study once showed, an observation was that 2/3 of us or more, when we actually type emails and we respond to emails, we actually stop breathing. It's a condition that has been called in the lay press is email apnea. So apnea means stopping breathing. So if you know the condition sleep apnea, it's when we actually have stopped breathing during the nighttime. Well, a lot of us, when we're doing digital work, I want you to be mindful of this. Pay attention to what happens to your breathing. Now, if you're spending several hours at the computer all day, imagine the amount of oxygen we're depriving to our tissues because we're under breathing or we're stopping breathing altogether. Now, that's going to send a chemical signal to the body that you're under threat, because you're limiting oxygen delivery to your body, right? And as a result of that, you might be producing more cytokines, your aerobic efficiency and fitness might be reduced, not just from the inactivity, but from the fact that your lungs are not being used to their full capacity. Okay, and with that, let's talk about cardio. So that's the C of the ABC paradigm. So with C, the way I talk about cardio is when I've talked to patients that have gone through COVID-19 or talked to doctors who've taken care of COVID patients in the hospital, One thing COVID patients universally tell us when they have a more significant infection is they feel like they're suffocating. They feel a sensation of air hunger, like they've been dragged underwater. They're dropped on top of a mountain told to run a marathon, right? So the way I reframe that situation is I tell individuals that we have to think of COVID-19 like running a 5K or a half marathon. We need to improve our lungs' resilience so we can tolerate an infection that actually directly targets our lungs. So what does aerobic fitness really mean? Aerobic fitness means that when you develop aerobic fitness, your body has greater resilience to physiological stress. And that can come in the form of physical stress, emotional stress, or infectious stress. With COVID-19, we're talking about an infection that can affect the lungs. So for many of my patients, I really try to assess at a baseline, what is their sensation of air hunger or shortness of breath? If they were to go up a flight of stairs, if I told them to jog a half mile or walk really fast or go up an incline, would they get short of breath really easily? And if the answer is yes, and we think aerobic fitness is compromised, then their lungs are going to be much more vulnerable if they get an infection that affects the lungs. So really zoning in on aerobic fitness is so critical. And my big concern in our current environment is both kids and adults are becoming more aerobically unfit. On the one hand, I have a lot of patients that are more fit than ever because now they have a little bit of extra time. They're not stuck in cars all day, commuting. So they're in great shape. But on the other extreme, I'm seeing people that have deteriorated because they're just holed up indoors. They're afraid to go outside, or they're no longer part of their fitness center. And their aerobic fitness has gone down dramatically. They're getting more short of breath. Their heart rate goes up when they do minimal exertion. And these are really, really dangerous warning signs. And the thing is, you can improve aerobic fitness without going crazy. You don't have to belong to a boot camp or fitness center. The optimal dose of exercise to optimize immune system function and improve aerobic function is what we call moderate dose exercise. So that is a dosage where you can basically, if we went for a walk together, we can have a conversation with just a little bit of effort. It's a level where we can mostly nasal breathe or breathe a little bit fast through our mouth. Now, if you're tracking heart rate, there's something I follow called the MAF heart rate. It's based on Dr. Phil Maffetone's research, and he's an elite endurance trainer. And basically, rough rule of thumb is if you were to take your age and you subtract it from 180. So if you're 40 years old, 180 minus 40, that's 140. So most of your exercise sessions should not exceed 140. So even if you're at 110, 120, 130s, that's a perfectly adequate dose for you to gradually improve aerobic fitness while not overstressing the body and increasing injury and all these things. And it's also a level that you can comfortably do for at least 30 minutes. So a lot of my patients that are exercisers, they're overdosing on high intensity exercise. And this is an important thing to be aware of because there is an optimal dose when it comes to exercise and immune system function. So look at this graph right here. The y-axis is the risk of developing respiratory lung infections, and the x-axis is the amount and intensity of exercise. So for individuals who are sedentary, you can look at the left side of this graph. There's that average risk of infection. As you elevate to moderate intensity exercise, that risk drops down. But then look at the right side of the graph. When we get into the very high intensity zone, what happens then? The risk of infection goes up pretty dramatically. So we need to be aware that we're not underdosing by being too sedentary, but we're also not overdosing on too much exercise that's going to compromise our immune system. All right. So how do you know whether you're in proper aerobic fitness or in proper shape? So one of the things I tell individuals is we sort of have to assess ourselves, just like in other parts of our life where we need to find a baseline metric, whether it's your blood pressure, your weight, or cholesterol. The same thing we need to do with fitness, because a lot of people don't realize whether they're improving aerobic fitness or not. So there's a specific marker called VO2 max, which you can measure in a lab, but it's not very accessible. But there are other surrogate markers through which you can actually assess your level of aerobic fitness. So I tell individuals that to do this, basically, you want to assess, let's say, your 1 mile walking time, or if you're a runner, what's your 1 mile running time, right? Or just simply, if there's a neighborhood circuit that you walk every day, measure the amount of time it takes you to walk that circuit. And then basically, as you gradually keep repeating that circuit over the next few weeks, you should naturally get faster and faster at the same heart rate. So again, if you stay with that within that proper heart rate zone, if you're building aerobic fitness, you will get faster at the same heart rate. And that's really a sign of improved aerobic fitness. Another sign is if you're doing this properly is over time, if you were to check your pulse in the morning or check your wearable, your resting heart rate should be going down. Your heart is becoming more efficient, you're becoming more aerobically fit, and so that resting heart rate will go down, blood pressure and other metrics will go down as well. This is a really popular, important post that I wrote. It teaches individuals, adults, and kids how to properly test for these things, because as we know, without our normal school hours, kids have become more sedentary. There's no formal sports. There's no PE. So I tell my parents out there, you need to treat aerobic fitness results as importantly as you treat their math and English scores, because in youth, if we actually have a weaker aerobic system, that will come back to haunt us later in life. Many of my adult patients that struggle with their health, they were not fit when they were younger. They were not physically active. So really make this a top priority in kids, that in addition to the usual homework that they do all day, they've got to set aside a minimum of 30 to 40 minutes, ideally 60 minutes for physical activity and exercise. I know that sounds very tough for typically overscheduled kids here in Silicon Valley, but for my kids who are juniors in high school, and this is mandatory. I don't care how much homework they have, every single day, we make sure they get some level of physical activity. So really make that a priority. Now, you can also use your body as a gym by using certain wearables. So activity trackers, there's plenty of options out there. You know, a lot of us are not basically attached to a gym or fitness center right now. So using your body weight to do basic exercises like push-ups and planks and pull-ups, etc. These are great. There's fantastic apps out there that can promote fitness. One of my favorites is the Johnson & Johnson free 7-minute workout app. You can give these a try and really try to figure out some independent ways that you can keep your body moving and fit. Now, in terms of, we're not going to talk about diet today, but I will tell you a couple of things about fasting workouts. So this can be an effective way for our body to actually facilitate fat burning. All I mean by fasting workouts is, number one, if you finish your dinner earlier and you have your breakfast just a little bit later and try to get a workout in the morning, you can actually enhance the burning of fat in the body, because when you wake up in the morning and you haven't eaten breakfast yet, you can access those fat stores much more readily. If you've got to eat something, and this is really more geared towards people that are trying to lose a little bit of extra body fat, if you've got blood sugar issues or insulin resistance like prediabetes and diabetes, doing fasting workouts, not every day, but a few days a week, can be a powerful way to get rid of some of those excess energy stores in our body. Okay, so give that a try. Intermittent fasting is very popular now. And I tell people, if you're going to do a little bit of the fasting, try a couple days a week to do a little bit of a workout. It doesn't have to be super intense. It can be a moderate level walk, the types of levels that we talked about, and try it in a fasted state and see how you do with that. Okay, so how do I define a successful workout for me? Well, subjectively, it's when my energizing effects last without crashing into fatigue. Now, if you talked to me 10 years ago, I was a type A exerciser. I did a lot of high intensity exercise. I would run at a heart rate of 150, 160, and that got to feeling normal to me. But what I'd also find is that I would often crash in the late afternoon, where I couldn't control my hunger at all. Because when you do high intensity exercise, you're burning a lot of sugar in the body. You want to burn some sugar, but if you're an over sugar burner, you're going to be an over sugar eater. And so a lot of people that are doing high intensity exercise, for the next 24 to 48 hours, they end up having intense cravings for carbohydrates. So once you find that adequate moderate dose, you'll find that you will not have those intense cravings. The other key marker for me is I do feel some soreness from the workout, but I'm not in pain that's going to spill over into the next workout. So one of my goals for fitness, and I recommend this to all my patients, is try to be the fastest recoverer, not the fastest runner, the highest jumper, all that stuff that we usually measure ourselves by. You want to see how quickly you can recover. And to me, that's a sign of youth. So if I did an intense hike today and I wake up tomorrow with minimal to no soreness, I know I've succeeded. And anyone of any age can actually learn to do that. For kids and teens, it's natural. Their body can heal and recover very quickly because it gets so much deep phase sleep. But for us adults, we have to do some of the stretches and things that I'll talk about in a moment that can help you recover more quickly. Okay, then I also talk about the concept of how we can become mobile workers. And I know this is not accessible to everyone, but I tell people, if you do have some room for an exercise bike, maybe you've got a dusty treadmill in the garage, are there ways that we can put our devices on these implements and get a little bit of work done? Now, in an ideal situation, I'd say 98% of my workouts have no work involved. For me, working out is a refuge away from work, but there are some days where I have so much to do that often I will strap my laptop to my bike, or I'll put it on a treadmill, and then I'll go through a couple of messages while I'm getting some work done. And it's nice because I'm energized. I'm not going at a super fast pace, but it's just enough where my body's burning some fat and sugar. It's keeping my brain energized, and I'm planning out my day. I'm popping out a couple of emails and just going through basic stuff. When I've got to do more focused creative work, presentations, writing my blog, I can't do it on a treadmill. I got to sit down or stand up and do it in a stationary position. But think about ways that you can incorporate some movement into your workday, especially on those days where you just can't find that magical 30 minutes to do dedicated exercise. Okay, now let's talk about some things that we can do. Remember, I told you recovering more quickly is one of the essential ways of staying fit. And for me, I was always born with super tight hamstrings. And the only time I'd stretch my hamstrings were before I worked out, and maybe I'd do a little bit after that. But the real magical secret I want to share with you is the key to hamstring mobility is, can you integrate that into your workday? And why is hamstring mobility important? It's one of the top causes for lower back pain. When people have limber hamstrings, they tend to have less low back pain. It can prevent all types of sports and workout injuries, and it actually improves your overall athletic performance. And again, prolonged sitting, it's a major hamstring tightener. And I should review, the hamstrings are basically the muscle groups in the back of your legs. You can see those 3 muscle groups there that are highlighted in the colors, but that's hamstrings. Now, how do we do this during a workday? Okay, so you can see a couple of different positions here that I'm doing. So basically on the left here, I'm working at an elevated desk. I've got a desk riser on top of that. And you can see my leg is actually underneath my keyboard there. Okay, and I put the name of the standing desk riser that I use. There's plenty of them out there, but that's one thing you can do. You can do a full-on hamstring stretch. And if you're not able to do that, you can do what I call a scissor stretch, where you put one leg in front of the other, you gently bend forward, and you feel a bit of a stretch on that leg. Here I am in my den. I've got my leg up on the bar. I've got the laptop in front of me, and I'm stretching out my hamstring there. By the way, people would always ask me, who's that scary person in the picture there? And that's Heath Ledger from the Joker. Basically, my family and I were big Dark Knight fans, so that's why I have a poster of the Joker there. But you can see that throughout my workday, I'm able to do things. Sometimes I have my foot up on a low stool. Even when I'm in clinic seeing patients and I'm doing some charting, I might put my foot up on a raised surface, and I feel just a little bit of a hamstring stretch. Doing that throughout the day really keeps that muscle very limber. Now, the other thing we need to work on is hip mobility. Most of my patients have very, very tight hips. When you've been sitting and you're stressed out, our hips tighten so much. And like the hamstrings, tight hips can strain that lower back. By the way, we're seeing a lot of low back pain. We call it quarantine low back pain. It's been written about in the science and research. People are spending so much time sitting and stressing that their backs are tightening up. And a lot of it is, yes, the back is immobile, but it's also the supporting structures like the hip and hamstrings that are doing this. And when your hips are tight, it throws off the alignment of your entire body. So all the downstream structures like your knees, your ankles, your feet, all of these things can be affected. And there's one particular muscle called the psoas muscle, and I'm showing it in this image here. It's a huge muscle that attaches from the thoracic spine down into the femur. And that is a huge muscle that gets very tight when we're sitting. And I call this sort of the magical muscle. A lot of people that do yoga, they tell people, they often say that this is the emotional muscle in our body. When we have a lot of pent up stress, this muscle tightens up. I can't say I necessarily agree with that, but I have found when my patients can loosen up that psoas muscle, they feel like their whole body has opened up. So how can we integrate some of these stretches? Well, basically a psoas stretch, I'm showing you what this gentleman's doing here. He's in a bit of a lunge position, then using a yoga strap where one end is around the ankle, and he's gently pulling on that to really get that stretch in there. This is a wonderful stretch if your body can handle this sort of range of motion. But I'm showing here again at my workstation that you can do a gentle psoas stretch even while you're working. I put my foot on an office chair and I gently put it back a little bit, and I've got a nice psoas stretch while I'm looking at the screen and getting some work done. Okay, simple thing that you can integrate. Another wonderful hip stretch is, if you're familiar with yoga, we call it the pigeon pose. And the reason we call it the pigeon pose is if you can see this woman's profile, it kind of mirrors this pigeon's profile as well. So pigeon is probably my favorite pose for opening up the hips. And this is how I integrate it at work. So I call this my high pigeon pose at work, where again, I've got my thigh up on a raised surface while I'm at the keyboard, in both situations on the right and the laptop. If you can't do a high pigeon, just start off with the pigeon on the floor. Okay, that's a great pigeon position to do. But as you gain more mobility, you might be able to find some modifications to really open up that hip further. Okay, Now, let's not forget about our feet and ankles. So often I'm in meetings during the day and my feet. So one of the things about the feet is a lot of us, we just wear shoes with very thick soles. We might be wearing shoes at home and we don't work the intrinsic muscles of our feet. A lot of people don't realize that our feet themselves have a core musculature, just like our body does. And when that core is strong, we can run faster and we have less issues like plantar fasciitis, Achilles, etc. So sometimes if I've done a run or something the other day, I'm in a meeting, I put my foot on a tennis ball or lacrosse ball or this roller stick. My stand-up workstation, if you're using a stand-up workstation, you should have an active mat, a standing mat. And this one in particular that I'm using actually has contours on it. So while I'm standing up and doing work, I might roll my foot on those little knobs there. I might roll my ankle back and forth on the side there on those ridges. So these are great things to do. And then if I can get outdoors every now and then, we call the practice grounding, where we just put our feet on the grass. Many of us, our feet have not contacted grass in months, maybe even years, and it is a different sensation. There's some science behind the practice of grounding, where because of some of the electrical energy that comes from the earth into our body, it can actually change the polarity. Now, I don't know if you buy that or not. All I can tell you is when you stand on grass, it feels really good. You're connected to nature, and it's a way to help modulate stress. Now, the other key thing is neck neutrality. This is a talk. I give talks to high schoolers now, and this is something I really focus on. And adults and teenagers need to learn about this. So let me teach you the physics of head position first. So as you can see in this diagram here on the left, when our head is basically crowning our spine, we're in a neutral position. There's no additional pounds of stress over the cervical area. But now for every inch our head protrudes further, which is a very typical Silicon Valley posture, every inch will add an extra 20 pounds to your spine, your cervical spine. So by the time you get to 2 inches forward, you're adding 40 pounds of pressure over that spine. Imagine that on a daily basis, right? And this is why I was shocked when I started practicing in Silicon Valley. And when I was doing primary care, I get x-rays of some of my young techies who are 20, 30 years old. I'd look at their x-ray because they've been having neck pain. And I could not tell the difference between their neck x-ray and someone who's 70 years old, because they've been carrying around 2 bowling balls on their spine for years, right? So this is so important, because now look what's happening to our kids and teens from an early age. They're already developing that head forward position. Now, what about when we're using our smartphone? So let's look at the physics of this. So look at the angle of head tilt when we're looking down at the phone. So it's 0 degrees tilt, 10 to 12 pounds. 15 degrees of tilt, 27 pounds, and so on. So by the time your neck is really tilted forward, you're adding maybe 50 to 60 pounds of pressure over that cervical spine. So this is an image I want people to remember, because it is so important to really achieve that neutral neck position. Let's see how we do that throughout the day. So this is a bit of an exaggerated position. I typically like to work in front of the screen. It makes maintaining a neck neutral position so much easier. But this position, I want to point out a few things. Here, I'm sitting in a modified, this is a Japanese meditation posture. I have the laptop really low, but even though the laptop screen is so low below me, you can see that my downward tracking eyes are keeping my neck in a neutral position. So if you happen to be working in a position where your laptop and screen is not right in front of you, you can use your downward tracking eyes. In the beginning, it might feel a bit funny, but your eyes will get used to it. So when I'm doing a lot of creative work, sometimes I will sit in this position, because this is almost, if you took the screen away and just looked at me, this is actually an optimal meditation position. I'm in that seated posture. My eyes are kind of tracked downward. It's an incredible way to sort of focus your energy and thoughts into one zone. But the key point here is use your eyes to compensate whenever your screen's below you, but whenever possible, try to keep that screen in front of you. It just makes this job much easier. This is a sample of my teenage boy's study station on the dining table. So this again is a sit-stand converter tabletop. So a lot of us may not have the space, or we may not want to buy a full-on standing desk. So these converter tabletops are cool things. So you can see a dining table. Kids. So basically they can sit at the screen with their neck in neutral position. And then if they want to sit, it's not like I'm banning sitting, too much standing is not necessarily a good thing. But basically when you do this, you can sit and then get your work done just by pushing the platform down. So very simple thing to try. Okay, now let's move on to strength. So I showed a couple images this is before, but one of the muscles that really helps protect our back and our knees and our ankles and feet is called the gluteus medius. And I'm showing you that in that image below, where it's the upper outer part of the buttock. So now when I'm staying with this workstation, you can basically assume kind of a semi-squat position. I've got a fabric resistance band around my thighs, and I'm basically gently pushing my thighs against that while I'm looking at the screen. Sometimes I will swing one leg back and forth. So my right leg might go outward, my left leg might go outward. So I'm constantly activating that muscle. I will tell you that this glute medius, when that muscle is strong, it can prevent a lot of downstream injuries. I've had patients with chronic knee pain, like I said, plantar fasciitis on the bottom of their foot. And as they get their glute medius stronger, that pain disappears. And the reason for that is now when they walk, when the gluteus medius contracts, it actually prevents the foot from just slamming down on the ground. It cushions that impact naturally because of that muscular activation. So this is something, again, I do during the workday. And the beautiful thing about this is if I go for a run after I've sort of worked this a little bit, it really fires while you're running. Many of us are running. We don't even know what that muscle is because we're not engaging it at all. So our legs are flopping down on the ground while we run. Our feet are getting sore. Our knees are getting sore. But just by doing this throughout the workday, I'm engaging that muscle. I'm awakening it. So it'll be active when I play basketball, when I go run, when I go hike. And that's really what you're trying to do through these practices is to wake up those muscles so they'll be ready to go when you actually work out and exercise. Now, leg strength is so important for people of all ages, but I'm especially laser focused on my seniors. So when I go visit my mom in Central California, she knows when I'm coming because I'm going to be checking her squats. I see if she can stand up from her chair. Can she do it without any effort at all? How many seated squats can she do? For those of us that have seniors that are basically not going to gyms and getting physically fit, I really encourage you to make sure they're getting some forms of exercise, especially those that are focused on leg strength. Leg strength is one of the top indicators of how well we age. When the legs become weaker, the rest of the body starts to fall apart. We're at increased fall risk, our metabolism slows down, our brain and cognitive health go down as leg strength goes down as well too. That's been shown in studies. So that's something we really want to keep track of. Now, also in addition to just doing two-legged bilateral exercises with the legs, one critical thing for you to really understand is how do I do single leg exercises? Single leg exercises are so important because often we don't know when we have a weaker side and the other side's compensating. So when you do exercises like the one shown here, which is a Bulgarian split squat, there's plenty of yoga poses that I put out like the tree, warrior, eagle, etc. You know, even when you're sitting in a chair, if you've got some armrest, you can try to gently stand up on one leg and sort of see if you're able to engage that one side. And you'll be shocked. Most people don't realize that one side is so much weaker than the other. And if that's the case, you've got to strengthen the other side so you don't develop issues in the joints later on. So make sure you're implementing single leg exercises. For our seniors, this is very important because it helps challenge their balance. Balance is something you want to hold on to as we age. Now, core strength, we all know the core is so important for protecting our back, protecting all the essential structures so we can be pain-free and more athletic. One position that people don't do enough of, which I think is overlooked, is we all probably know about the plank, but the reverse plank is one of my favorite exercises. And I think it's such an important position. I have my kids do this almost every day because what it does is in the reverse plank that's pictured here is it actually strengthens the back muscles. And that's what we need to maintain our body in an upright position, maintain our head over the spine. The thing I love about this position too is you maintain it by engaging the core, you tighten the buttocks, but notice how the forearms are reversed here too. This is a beautiful way to increase the circulation into the forearm and hands and fingers. So it's just a great all-around exercise. And if you're not used to doing it the first time you do it, your body's going to sag. But then as you tighten that core more and more and it gets stronger, you'll be able to hold that position very comfortably. So really give this a try. I think it's a wonderful exercise that's often overlooked. Now, in general, when it comes to exercises, if you've got limited time, I tell people focus on large functional strength, large muscle group strength. So if we think about the way our ancestors worked and lived, they were using large muscles all day long, right? So, my family's from Calcutta. When I was young and growing up, I'd go visit Calcutta almost every summer. I'd always watch how these incredible athletes, these rickshaw pullers, would load all kinds of cargo into their rickshaws or huge families. And literally every single day, they're doing multiple deadlifts every day as they're loading and unloading passengers. Lifts are an incredibly important exercise. So you can use some weights, you can use some dumbbells, you can use a bar, whatever you do, practice sort of hinging down and then pulling up again. Activates a lot of large muscle groups. The squat we talked about is so important. You know, when I look at this Asian squat, it reminds me of my late grandmother. Even into her 80s, she can sit in a corner of a room in India and she can make tea, coffee, and breakfast on a low table. And her butt was literally able to touch the ground while her feet were flat on the floor. I don't think there is many teenagers or young people that can do this nowadays because we're so, fixated towards chairs now. But this shows an incredible amount of strength and range of motion in the hips. So you can mimic some of this by doing what are called sumo squats, where you can hold a kettlebell, a light weight, and then gradually sort of try to go down and improve that hip range of motion. And then finally, you can do simple exercises known as walks or carries. So again, if you've got dumbbells or some weights, literally just put them in your arms and go walk down the hall, walk up and down the stairs. And the important thing about all these exercises is they are functional. A lot of my patients do all kinds of crazy boot camps. They're jumping off platforms, they're using ropes. I'm not opposed to this, but many of them will get injured. And I tell them, you know what? When I get older, I want to make sure that I can lift my own suitcases and load them into an overhead bin when the day finally comes where I can travel. That's functional movement. So my exercises will mimic that. I want to be able to carry my suitcases, which is like the farmer's walk or the suitcase carry. I want to know that when I'm older that I can lift up my grandchildren or maybe my great-grandchildren if I'm lucky, and I can lift them up high, which is a sumo squat maneuver right there, right? That's functional strength and movement. It's range of motion. It's what's going to be applicable to your daily living rather than me doing these awkward types of positions that are going to hyperextend my joints and make me susceptible to injury. So these are some key things that you can focus on. The other thing we often forget about, gosh, today was such a beautiful day here in the Bay Area, right? I appreciate weather so much now after going through all the smoke and the firestorms. So any chance you can take your work outdoors, take advantage of that opportunity. So I've got a podium laptop stand here in the backyard. I put my laptop on there and I'm going through some emails here. And my dog loves being out there with me. So working outdoors in nature, and when it's warm enough, I've just got like a tank top or a short sleeve shirt and shorts so I can soak in some natural solar vitamin D. So wonderful way. It's like the same work you do outdoors. It just feels so much lighter and different than just doing it indoors all day. And again, like I said, we're in the Bay Area where we get so many of these magical days, even in the wintertime. Get out there and get that fresh sunshine. Okay, so now to close off with a few resources for those of you that join later, if you go to this bit.ly link, this is where I've got my free COVID wellness guide that has been used all over the world. We've had multiple people give us feedback that's helped them so much. So it teaches you exercises. It's got links to breathing strategies, so how to do the breathing techniques. I've got nutrition guidelines on there too in terms of which foods are known to actually optimize immunity. So just put your email address there and you'll get that ebook for free. And there's also other free ebooks that I've been loading because I get so many questions after seminars. I've actually gone through the practice over the years of making these free resources. So a lot of people having issues with sleep and fatigue. So the top right, you can opt in for that sleep and fatigue book, cholesterol, diabetes management, and children's health in the bottom right. So these resources are all freely accessible to you if you go to that link. And then I am doing a lot of school webinars and seminars, and I'm trying to stretch my schedule to do this in the evening. So if you feel like you're part of a school district or school that can use these tips and resources, I've got tailored talks for teaching staff and students as well too. So those resources are there. I also Instagram at the handle down there. My blog address is here. And you'll have access to all this through the recordings after the talk's done. And then finally, I work for Palo Medical Foundation and Sutter Health, and the link to the COVID-19 access page where you can connect to primary care specialty and get other resources is right there for you. So with that, give me a few moments. I'll actually put this back on this page so you have access to this, and then we'll get into the Q&A session here. All right.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ron. So for all of you who are attending, you are welcome to put questions in the chat. That is probably the easiest way for us to get them. But otherwise, if you would like to use the raise hand feature in Zoom and ask questions out loud, that will also work. We have one question in the chat so far, and it is a request to try to show us some breathing exercises. If you're able to share any.
Absolutely. More than happy to do that. So very simple, and breathing is something I talk separately about, but I'm going to teach you two techniques. One is the 4-7-8 breathing technique. This is a very simple one to do. And all 4-7-8 refers to is you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 7 seconds, and you breathe out for 8 seconds, okay? So I'll mentally do the count, but I want everyone looking at the screen right now, at the count of 3, we're gonna breathe in for 4, we're gonna hold for 7, you're gonna breathe out for 8, okay? So count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Now hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. With most breathing techniques, you can pick your own interval, but if the expiration phase is roughly double or at least a little bit longer than the inspiration phase, that's really what can help calm down that nervous system very actively. I've talked about a lot of wearables that people wear. So sometimes you might have your wearable set to 6 or 7 breaths per minute, and then your wrist will vibrate. That's the breathe app. It's another great way to just slow down the breathing. So at a macro level, you're thinking about, how do I breathe slowly and silently? So when I'm in my calmest zone, I'm breathing through my nose, and my goal is I don't want to hear any turbulence in the nose at all. And the only way I can do that is by really slowing down my breathing. So just focus on that. The other one that you'll get from the resource guide, which is one of my favorites, is alternate nostril breathing. It's where you breathe in through your nose, you hold, and then you breathe out through the other nostril. I'm not going to demo that here, but if you look at some of the YouTube videos that I have on the link, it will teach you how to do that. Another very powerful, powerful breathing technique. All right.
All right, next question. We have a few more in the chat. We have some questions around nutrition. So if you have any nutrition tips that you can share,
Sure.
someone is asking particularly about seafood and what you would recommend for that. So
Perfect.
nutrition.
Absolutely. Okay, yeah. So let's focus on nutrition for a second. So again, when you go into the survival guide, there's a whole dedicated nutrition section, and I write a lot on nutrition. So if you go to my blog, you'll see the last few passages talk about fasting and nutrition. At a very high level, the first thing I would moderate is what we talked about, is a timing of eating. We are finding through studies that when people eat beyond, let's say 7:30, especially after 8 p.m., the body is not equipped to digest beyond that time. The hormones and enzymes in your body that turn food into energy, they're like daytime workers. So when it gets dark outside, and especially after 8:30 p.m., we can't convert food to energy very efficiently. So as a result of that, the food gets stored in our liver, where it produces sugar and fats like triglycerides. It gets stored in the belly, where we generate those cytokines. So first thing I want people to work on is, how do we get dinner done earlier and get the whole family at the dinner table? First thing. The second thing we talked about with breakfast, for those of us that want to lose a little bit of weight, can we push the breakfast out a little bit so we have an interval of at least 12 to 14 hours without food? Okay, so if you finish dinner by 7 p.m., then the next day maybe breakfast will be at 9 or 10 a.m. Perfect way to start. Now, when you are eating, you've got to focus on diverse plant-based foods. Again, meats are fine. You want to eat high-quality meats, but you want to get reds and oranges and purples and greens. When I do a dietary intake on my patients, many of them are eating a lot of greens because, quite frankly, greens are so easy. You can go to any store and get bags of greens, right? But the purples, the oranges, the reds, now in the fall, we've got bright, deep oranges. Those colors can really help optimize the immune system. So really try to get those foods into the system as well. And with seafood, the other question, I think seafood is absolutely essential. Try to buy the highest quality seafood that you can, and try to get 2 to 3 servings in per week, because the omega-3s in fish and seafood, they can not only help with heart health, they can also optimize the immune system health as well too. So I'm a big fan of doing all those things.
All right, next question. You showed some favorite exercises for while you're working at a laptop. Do you have favorite exercises to work into other everyday activities, such as cooking or laundry? Thank you for the talk and the tips.
Oh, I love that. You know, that's true. I shouldn't always assume that everybody's working in front of a computer, but actually when I'm doing daily chores like helping out in the kitchen and doing laundry, wow, these are great opportunities, because now your body's even freed up even more. And you know, when you're cooking, often there's a lot of waiting involved, right? You're chopping up some veggies, you put them in a pot, you're sauteing, you're waiting for water to boil. What a great time for you to jump into those sumo squats, or maybe even lift one leg up and practice your balance, right? I mean, if you're close by to an area, I'm assuming your floor is clean, can we do a plank position? So absolutely you can integrate all this. Even when you're doing laundry, just the act of sort of loading stuff into a dryer or a washer, can we do a deep squat while we're loading things? Instead of dumping everything at one time, let's break up the laundry and do maybe 10 portions of the laundry and do a sumo squat while you're loading it into the dishwasher, into the laundry machine or the dryer. So once you sort of integrate this into your day, you can get very creative around what different things you can do. When I'm in a meeting throughout the day, I've got a kettlebell next to me, I've got a resistance band next to me, I've got all types of implements, so I can constantly integrate different types of exercises. And you want to tailor it to your body. My problem areas are my hips and hamstrings, so I focus on that throughout the day. You might have issues with neck pain, so you want to constantly work on neck mobility, do neck stretches and exercises, maintain that neutral position. But yeah, you can incorporate this into your daily house chores, and you'll see your energy levels get better just by doing that. All right.
All right, our next question is about supplements, and this is from the previous question, more about seafood. For those who have seafood allergies, how effective, in your medical opinion, are the omega-3 pills? And then maybe it's also a question about supplements in general. I know we're hearing a lot about different vitamins and taking supplements. So you may have some thoughts on that as well.
Sure. And, because I get so many questions on supplements, again, I know I keep coming back to this, but when you go to the resource guide, the end of the resource guide has a section on supplements. Now, the key high meta point I want to make about supplements is, yes, you want to try to get all these nutrients and vitamins through foods. And then obviously, if you've been diagnosed with a deficiency, we need to replace that with vitamins. Now, the question on omega-3s, there's been a lot of conflicting research about omega-3s in terms of what value do they add for heart health. But generally, if you look at the constellation of studies and the more recent meta-analyses around it, it looks like omega-3 supplements, especially if you're not able to get it through normal fish intake, might have some benefit for heart health and overall immune function. So when you go into my blog, in the search window, put in omega-3. There's a little bit of complexity to this topic. I did a very detailed blog post on the pluses and minuses. What about flaxseed and these things? But I think in general, omega-3 supplementation in most patients is safe and it can have some beneficial impact. And during this season, it looks like it might have some immune boosting effects. Now, if we're coming to COVID-19 and thinking about high-level supplements, I think there's a good amount of emerging evidence to show that vitamin D supplementation does have beneficial impacts on the immune system. These are not definitive studies, but they show a very strong association, not causation, between optimizing vitamin D levels and lowering the risk of getting vitamin D, and also lowering the risk of having a severe complication or actually even dying from vitamin D. We're seeing enough of that. And the reason I'm actually able to safely recommend this is because vitamin D is something that's been around for a long time. It's something I was already prescribing in my patients. So I feel a lot of confidence in telling people that vitamin D supplementation is a reasonable strategy to try. And also the thing I got to tell you here in Silicon Valley, people that have my skin color or darker, when I check their vitamin D levels, some of them have severely lessened vitamin D levels. So they've got to be on high dose supplementation. We want to get that level above 30 because the studies that we've looked at have shown that when the levels are 20 or below, that's when risk goes up quite a bit. And in my patient population, I'd say 2/3 of my patients are below 20, and some have single-digit vitamin D. Now, if you were to just take a standard dose, 2,000 international units is pretty good. The last supplement I'll tell you about, which has, again, been around for a long time, it's safe to use, is vitamin C. I think even before COVID-19, there are studies that show taking, a gram or 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C can shorten the duration of colds. We can maybe extrapolate that into coronavirus. There are studies of high dose vitamin C when you get infected that might actually lower complications. So I think that's another reasonable strategy. And you're right, there's a whole host of other ones. I address some of those in the blog post. But again, what I want to tell you, my macro point on supplements is because the way the news reports on them makes them sound like they're miracle drugs. Again, I've been treating patients and seeing patients for the last several months. If you're sitting and you're sedentary and you're eating unhealthy foods, none of these supplements is going to compensate for that. So I always worry that when I endorse supplements, people think that, hey, I can sit on my couch, I can be aerobically unfit, and I can just pop omega-3s, vitamin D and vitamin C, I'll be fine. Absolutely not. So remember, this is a supplement to all the foundational lifestyle changes that we talked about. That was a long answer, but it's a complex question. So I want to make sure I address all parts of that.
Well, and next question, you gave a good kind of lead into this. Are there similar risks to standing for too long as there are to sitting for prolonged periods?
I love that question. So remember, the whole act is interrupting prolonged sitting. But yeah, I agree that standing for too long isn't necessarily good for our feet or a low back. So listen to your body. I mean, if you're standing for a long time, the body starts to stiffen up, the back feels tight, by all means, sit down. Sitting is not banned. What I would say is learn to be a better sitter. I think people that really experience pain from sitting are the ones that are sitting like this, right? But once you strengthen your core and you're upright, your hands are to the side, and you're sitting with a very active posture, that's a much healthier position to be in. So definitely alternate between healthy upright sitting posture and standing. And this is something I work with my teenagers all the time. You might be walking by their rooms and we can see kids and adults in all types of different positions with their laptops. And, I'm not draconian where I'm like, you must not sit in this position all the time, but I give gentle reminders that, you know what, we should try to really optimize that posture while we're sitting and standing. So yeah, definitely standing and sitting, going back and forth between different positions is encouraged. You don't have to stand for hours on end.
All right, so we don't have additional questions in the chat at this time. If any attendees, if you would like to verbally ask a question of Dr. Ron, please feel free, or if you have additional questions that you'd like to put in the chat, please go ahead. Water intake has just popped up in the chat if you have recommendations as well for how much water everyone should be drinking.
Yeah, great question. Hydration is a very important way to maintain our metabolism, our energy levels. And one thing I find is in the wintertime, as the weather gets colder, often people underconsume beverages. So you do want to make sure you're drinking enough fluids to keep your urine almost clear or light in color. And if you're not a big fan of drinking, a lot of people are very sensitive to certain temperatures. You can do herbal teas, you can do warm water, with salt, lemon, etc. But use something that you can drink throughout the day that's going to keep you well hydrated. I actually, during this season, I love to pick up bone broth, and I will literally have a huge thermos and I put bone broth in there because bone broth has so many immune stimulating chemicals in it. It's got collagen. So again, if you're tired of just doing water, plain old boring water, you can do soups, you can do broths, you can do bone broth, you can add, whatever is going to make it a little bit more flavorful. But definitely, I'm glad you brought up hydration. That's an important part of immune system strategy. All right.
Another question from the chat. What are some ways to encourage those who are resistant to exercise to get moving? Any motivational strategies?
Yes. Okay. So it's funny you bring up this question because 2 or 3 blog posts ago, I'd recommend you go to my blog. I wrote a post on how to get your family members motivated to exercise. And it's interesting because when we tell our own loved ones to do things, often we're perceived as being naggers. I'm sure all of you have experienced this. I get eye rolls from my teenagers sometimes. These things will happen because when somebody's very close to you, when you give them advice, they can't necessarily take that objectively. We automatically, our subconscious might be defensive. We might take it as a personal attack. So the first thing is, can you get someone else to give that advice? Like, for example, if this is a spouse who you can't get to move, maybe you can connect them for a doctor's appointment. Maybe you can get them signed up to a trainer, a Zoom trainer, somebody else that can impart that advice. The other thing is if they will listen to you, instead of telling them, hey, you're lazy, go out and run, if it's a teenager or whatever, can you just get them to stand more often? Maybe they can start doing some of the movements that we talked about just to get their body activated. The other key thing is, it's very difficult to get people moving where they're eating the wrong diet. If you're eating a lot of processed foods, excessive amounts of sugars or starchy foods like flatbreads, rice, lots of lentils throughout the day, your body goes into energy conservation mode. So if you've got prediabetes, if you've got extra belly fat, if you've got high triglycerides, your body is in an energy storing metabolism. And when you're storing energy, it's very difficult to get your energy levels up. When I used to eat like that, you had to get a forklift to get me out of my chair to get moving again because all my energy was towards storage. So sometimes by doing some of that intermittent fasting and optimizing nutrition, that will get people a little bit more active. So that's another strategy, is try to impact it or influence it through dietary strategies. And then maybe micro movements throughout the day might get them on the right track. And if all else fails, can you get them to connect with a doctor, a trainer, or somebody else who can maybe do a better job of getting them moving?
Great. All right. Any additional questions for Dr. Ron? We don't have any more in the chat, but if anybody would like to ask, please feel free.
Yeah, so I can see the chat, some questions about depression, stress, mental health notes, so This is a bit of a separate topic, but I will tell you that if you go to my blog, I've incorporated a lot of tools and resources around stress moderation. It's a big issue right now. Stress has always been an issue even before COVID-19, but now in our teenagers or kids in our family units, those of us that are parents of very young children, there's so many different layers of stress right now. Now, one thing I would tell you is sometimes with emotional stress, it's very difficult for us to fix our mind with our mind, right? So for those of you that are struggling, maybe you're trying meditation, maybe you're trying mental techniques to help you and you're not seeing success, I would actually come back to what we talked about today. If you can get your body moving and you fix your diet and you can improve your metabolism by doing that, you can improve your aerobic fitness, often the mental health will get better as a product of that. Often you'll feel more engaged and motivated to do breathing exercises, to do meditation. So I actually think about doing that. And we see that, my wife being a pediatrician, often she'll see in her kids, in her teen patients, that when they cut out a lot of sugar and processed foods, they feel better. When they're getting a little bit more physically active, they feel better. So if you're struggling to fix the mind with the mind, work on movement, work on diet, work on metabolism. It can be super, super powerful. And I want to remind people that when you look, and I put this in a separate stress talk of mine, when you look at most therapeutic interventions for conditions like anxiety, depression, and attention deficit disorder, they've done scatter plot diagrams. They've looked at everything from yoga to nutritional supplements, to prescription medications. And usually the most effective tool by far is aerobic level exercise. When people get aerobically fit, their mood elevates more than anything else. So I think this is a very fitting question because we often don't think about exercise as being a mood enhancer. We think about it as a way of maybe reversing disease or burning fat and losing weight, but it is one of the most powerful mental health strategies. And now in our time where we're so sedentary, I think a lot of our mood is basically linked to that sedentary behavior. And now as the weather gets colder and things get, days are getting darker, people have more of a tendency to be even more sheltered indoors. So I'd encourage you to get out and stay physically active. Thanks for your kind comments, sir. Yep.
And another question about zinc lozenges that seem to be sold out. Are they useful? And should everyone try to find some?
So zinc has a decent amount of science behind it. So basically, even before COVID-19, taking zinc lozenges has been shown to shorten the duration of the cold virus. So if you take it at the onset of symptoms and you take it the right way, every 3 to 4 hours, you can often see a shortening in the duration of the infection. And some of that looks like it can be applicable to coronavirus because, again, coronavirus is within the family of cold viruses. I know people have been trying to find lozenges. It's very difficult to get a hold of that. What about supplements and tablets? So one thing I think a lot of people that are have a lot of questions on supplements, when you go to my survival guide, at the very end, there's a section on supplements, and I actually cover a lot of these, but then I have a link to a talk by a colleague of mine. And that talk actually covers zinc and a lot of these things. But to answer this question, yes, zinc lozenges can have some benefit in those initial phases. So it is something to consider, but I know it's very difficult to get our hands on that right now because I think a lot of people are stockpiling on zinc lozenges now.
All right. Any additional questions for Dr. Ron? Please feel free to ask. We have a shy group maybe for you.
Yeah. So maybe I'll throw in another thing that I didn't talk about here, and we can see if other questions come up. There is a molecule in the body called nitric oxide, and it is the most powerful. It's one of the most important molecules in our body for optimizing health. So nitric oxide, what it does is it lowers blood pressure. It keeps our blood vessels relaxed. It is an incredible molecule that was discovered well before COVID-19. But we're finding in our COVID-19 environment that nitric oxide can actually be antiviral. It literally kills COVID-19. It can help modulate our immune system so we're not producing too many cytokines. It can open up the lungs. It does like pretty much everything you can dream of for a molecule to do to keep us fit and healthy during COVID-19. So now the magical question is, how do you produce more nitric oxide in the body? And I'm going to give you a couple strategies of how to do that. The first thing is, guess what? Nasal breathing. Nasal breathing, actually, when you breathe through the nose, our nasal sinuses here, they produce about 20 to 25% of our body's nitric oxide. So when we're nasal breathing and specifically nasal humming, so literally, Just doing that. You're humming music. Exactly. You hum like that. I heard somebody humming there. I love that. So when you're humming, you're basically causing those sinuses to vibrate, and they actually release more nitric oxide, interestingly. Now, one recommendation I would have is make sure you're not using antibacterial mouthwash, because antibacterial mouthwash actually kills the bacteria in your mouth that actually help produce the nitric oxide. So all those popular antibacterial mouthwashes, get rid of them. So that's the first thing, is nasal nitric oxide is one way, but by far the most powerful way to increase nitric oxide in the body is through exercise. When you're more aerobically fit, our blood vessels will produce more of that nitric oxide. So that's one of the most powerful ways. The other way is to safe sun exposure. So sun, that's basically the UVA rays that go through our skin, will elevate nitric oxide. And then lastly, there are specific foods that can elevate nitric oxide in the body. And interestingly, we said nitric oxide is good for the blood. So think of some of the blood red fruits and vegetables out there. Beets, for example. Beets can elevate nitric oxide. Dark, deep berries, watermelon, green vegetables, green leafy greens can do that, dark chocolate. So I tell people, really think about what can elevate nitric oxide. Exercise, top of the list, but a lot of these other things, nuts and seeds are another one too. These are all powerful things that can elevate nitric oxide levels. Great. So there's a question about, in my resource page, do I talk about brands? I actually don't. And the reason is I don't have any product or brand affiliations. But the reason I don't mention specific brands is because sometimes brands can get pulled. Sometimes the quality control can vary. Whenever you're looking for brands, I would recommend you go through a third-party site that actually evaluates these different brands. So one of the ones that I use personally is called Consumer Lab. And literally, you can just opt into their program. Consumer Lab has incredible reviewed information on different brands for supplements. And I think their subscription is less than $5 a month. So if you just want to do a 1-month subscription and put down all of your favorite supplements, whatever you consider taking, vitamin D, omega-3s, etc., get down the brands that are most highly certified, because again, these are independent third-party testing. And then you can choose to stay on their list, but you can just get off that list and then find the brands that you want. But I otherwise do not recommend specific brands. Great. Getting some nice feedback here. Thank you for your comments. Exercise equipment. Yeah. So when you go into for example, I showed some of the things. So when you go into the resource guide, I do mention some of the brands. If you are an Instagrammer, if you go to Instagram, I often do introduce different exercise equipment and different things that I use from home exercise fitness. Again, I have no product affiliations, but I just recommend certain brands because I've used them and I've enjoyed using them. So between the resource guide and if you follow Instagram, follow me there, you can find some brand recommendations there. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about supplements. But that was good advice on supplements anyway. I think people always struggle to find, which brand should I use amongst the thousands of different vitamin Ds and omega-3s out there.
Additional questions for Dr. Ron? Any other topics that you all would like to ask about during tonight's session?
And I think somebody needs to push mute because I feel like I'm watching TV with them right now. So.
Dr. Ron, anything else you would like to share with the group before we sign off for the evening?
Yeah, no. So, listen, we're going into, I know a lot of us are looking at these scary numbers out there, right? So everyone's getting very anxious with the rise of COVID-19. We never imagined it would be here for this long. But like I said, we've had several months of experience. And if you really stick to these lifestyle strategies, even in the midst of our upcoming winter, you can really maximize your chances of not having a major event from having COVID-19. So I hope you can incorporate these. The other key message I want to give you is please be sure you stay connected to your healthcare system. Many of my patients postpone their labs or their screening exams, and doctors reporting, undiagnosed cancers that are coming into the late stage, or often I'm seeing labs where glucose numbers have gone off the charts. So now that, at least within our group, all of our specialists and primary care doctors are available by video visits, we've kept all our facilities very safe. Be sure you're getting checked. Don't drop off with your healthcare, because this is a time more than any where you want to make sure all those health risks are managed properly. So I hope this has been helpful, and I appreciate everyone joining. But yeah, that would be my closing message.
Thanks so much. And thank you all so much to all of our attendees. We have a couple maybe last questions
Oh,
coming.
yeah.
So for those who have a history of autoimmune diseases, are there any additional concerns in regards to COVID that you'd like to share?
So listen, there are individuals that have chronic health conditions, specifically ones that affect the immune system. So autoimmunity is one of them. Those that also involve insulin resistance, so diabetes, prediabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, so having cardiovascular risks, all of these do elevate our additional risk of having a more severe COVID-19 outcome. Okay. So autoimmune diseases, yes, these are individuals that are more susceptible. But the good news is I've seen patients that have these risks and they follow these lifestyle principles, and even they have sailed through these infections with no issues. So I don't want you to become overly paranoid that, oh my God, because I have this condition, I shouldn't go outside. I should completely, close myself off. No, follow the distancing guidelines that we talked about, the ways to lower that viral load. But I think it's even more motivation to make sure we're focused on optimizing lifestyle changes. So then you can really optimize the immune system in the face of that. So again, it's not a cause for alarm. It's just a cause to be a little bit more cautious in prioritizing health. So that'd be my main message there.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ron. So for all of you joining us tonight, we will have our recording of this evening's talk available soon on our Santa Clara County Library District YouTube page, and I'll be sharing it with Dr. Ron as well. Please be sure to take a look at all of the links that he provided. There is so much additional information. I know I have been to his blog, and there is just such a wealth there of more that you can read and learn. So if you are looking for additional tips, additional information, please be sure to check that out. And we thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate everyone taking some time to come on and spend some time learning about their health and how they can be well. So many thanks to Dr. Ron. Many thanks to all of you for attending. Everybody stay safe and be well.
Great. Thank you, Claire, for the opportunity. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.